Hi, I'm Emily Pohl-Weary, and I graduated from UBC's optional residency creative writing program in 2009. I've published 7 books, some of them are here in front of me, and I found the whole process of working with teachers and mentors in the program to be an incredible experience, helped me raise my writing to a new level. I tend to write in whatever genre fits the project I'm working on. So as you can see, I have, well, you can't see, but there's poetry, middle grade mystery, a novel for adults, a female superhero anthology, and this is my latest novel for teens. It's a girl werewolf book. I also wrote a graphic novel about a girl pirate named Violet Miranda, whose best friend Elsa. They were based on 2 women pirates in history, and I worked in very close collaboration with my friend Willow Dawson, who's an illustrator. She kind of ran the show. When you're putting the words together for a graphic novel, they tend to be very script-like. It's actually one of the great joys I had at UBC was working with Sue and Sarah on screenwriting. So I was thinking of comics as being almost halfway between novels or even poetry and screenplay, because you're essentially working with static images, a series of static images, and the process becomes much more about the collaboration and much bigger than this, the sum of the parts. It's something that grows with the two, like the writer and the artist, basically working back and forth with each other. My writing tends to skew young, partly because of my writing style. I think it's pretty simple, pretty simplistic, but also most likely because those were the hardest years in my life and I'm constantly trying to rewrite them. I wish I was more like the girls in Not Your Ordinary Wolf Girl and Strange Times at Western High, but unfortunately I wasn't. So I'm not saying that I'm creating heroes who are perfect or heroines who are perfect. I'm creating girls who muddle through and know their own mind and are pretty okay with who they are rather than how I was. I guess growing up there weren't a lot of empowered role models in young adult fiction. In fact, young adult fiction wasn't really a genre then, with the exception of like Judy Blume and Beverly Cleary and that kind of thing. So I was reading Nancy Drew, I was reading Sherlock Holmes, I was reading a lot of mysteries and actually science fiction. I read a lot of science fiction, which are often very like action-based, this heroic epic type, like everything's moving really quickly, and I wanted to see girls like the ones in my neighborhood. I grew up in downtown Toronto in a neighborhood called Parkdale, which was like really diverse, and I wanted to see my friends reflected in the stories and my own kind of experience. So when I realized, wow, I can do this for a living, I can actually tell stories, create stories, I wanted to reflect what my life was like more than anything. I mean, even in my family there's a lot of diversity, and I felt like it wasn't appearing in fiction when I was growing up, which was a great shame. I always tell people that becoming a writer was more of a process of elimination. I figured out that I couldn't do anything else for any significant period of time without wanting to like tear my hair out or like smash things. And I thought, what is the thing that's always brought me joy? And it's stories. It's essentially opening a window, the way a book will open a window. So I decided, maybe, or I thought maybe I could tell stories. I would do that for other people. And I've been chasing that ever since. That sort of like each time I think I get a little better at telling stories. And because I jump around from genre to genre, poetry, novels, screenplay, comics. Essentially, I have to learn again each time, but yeah, there's a cumulative effect. For 8 years, I published my own literary magazine called Kiss Machine. It was a conga line of art and culture, and when I started it in like 2000, it was essentially just a zine. It was photocopied, and my friend Paula and I would just hand paint, like with acrylics, and paint all the covers and put stickers on them and stuff like that. But as we kept doing it over the years, it got bigger, and we got some funding and some ads, and we were able to actually like pay a designer and get some color pages and nicely printed. Kiss Machine was amazing. I'm still meeting people everywhere I go. I'm still meeting people who are like, "You published me in Kiss Machine." It was the first time I was ever published, it was a lot of fun and a lot of work. I always tell beginning writers that you essentially have to figure out your way into the publishing industry, and if you take the front door like everybody else, you're essentially swimming with all the fishes. But if you figure out your own thing that you feel comfortable with, like Kiss Machine was for me, making zines. Before Kiss Machine, I made my own zines just of my writing, again, hand-painted or stickers on the cover, and I would sell them at events, and it was almost like this buffer. As writers, well, at least some of us are pretty, well, we tend to like to be kind of behind the scenes rather than the one that's like in the spotlight. So having a zine, having Kiss Machine allowed me to like go up to my favorite writers and even publishers and say like, "Hey, here's this thing I made. Maybe you'll like it. I really love this book you published," or, I just read this story you wrote and it was amazing. Maybe you want to send me something for Kiss Machine. Yeah, it went on for 8 years, so I guess I was enjoying it. But the thing is, like, don't expect to make any money with small magazines. That's one of the other things. It has to be a labor of love. Aside from writing, I've done a lot of writing workshops for different communities. As I mentioned, I grew up in Parkdale in a pretty dense, when I was younger, pretty bleak neighborhood. It's gentrifying a lot, and a lot of artists live there now, but the way I survived essentially was by reading and writing. That was the thing that helped me get through my youth. So when I got older, I had a moment, I think it was in 2006, and it actually, the incident forms the basis of my latest book, Ghost Sick, which took almost 10 years to write. But a young family friend was murdered just 5 blocks from where I grew up. And I looked around at my baby brother, who was then 18, and his friends, and realized, especially a lot of boys, they were getting into a lot of trouble, a lot of experiences with the police, and I actually realized that a couple of them couldn't read their police reports, and I thought, something really wrong going on here when you're handed a stack of paper all this kind of legalese that tells the court what you did or didn't, or supposedly did or didn't do. You can't access the information for yourself. You need a lawyer to explain things, and maybe, if you're poor, you don't get a lot of access to lawyers. So sort of thinking about that and thinking about how the school system was failing kids, failing youth, especially boys. There was also a lot of news coming out about success rates of young men in high school and inner city high schools and that kind of thing. And I thought, like, it's really setting people up if you can't speak for yourself and you can't read your own police report. So that was when I thought, well, maybe I'll just try to create a little space in the local library for youth who were maybe like me. Because I didn't see anything like that in the neighborhood. And I got a little bit of seed funding from the Ontario Arts Council to try a pilot program. And it was, I think, 8 or 10 weeks long. I just opened, I got a local youth to, who I knew who was, really bookish and loved to read, to help me make a poster, and hired a second youth, and we just, would put posters up everywhere. And I was like, don't put them up just in the schools and the libraries, put them in the alleyways and next to bars and the place. I was trying to, think where you would find youth who might not be at school, and I think the poster was are you the type of person who's always scribbling in a notebook or writing long messages and, or making up song lyrics in your head? Well, this might be a group for you. It was called the Parkdale Street Writers, and I was hoping to register something 15 to 20 youth, and we registered 38 for that first program. So I was thinking, maybe I'm onto something. And at the end of the pilot, I was like, well, what should we do next? And they were saying, longer. We just want it longer. Why is it ending? So I just kept kind of applying for funding, and I would always bring in guest writers, trying to make sure that those writers reflected the backgrounds and communities of the youth who were in the group, to say, yeah, not all writers have to look like me. There are these amazing writers telling all kinds of stories in all aspects of life. And it was more about what the youth were interested in. I didn't go to it with a sort of preconceived notion of, you must learn this, this, and this. Just wanted to say, there are other youth out there are other people out there who are like you, who just want to kind of sit in the corner and write and read and talk about books and stories, and it's okay. It's, I think the way to cultivate a love of learning is to not force things on people. It's to sort of say, well, what are you interested in, and let's follow that, that rabbit hole or whatever, that path. So I just kept coming up with more and more workshops around topics the youth were interested in, and sometimes I'd throw them out the window and just go with whatever they wanted to do that day. And it kept going and going and going, and lasted 6 years. And by the 6th year, we were getting funding to run a hip hop program and a filmmaking program, and we had a junk band for a while, and we just the youth just kept asking for things, and I was like, okay, let's see if we can do it. And in the meantime, I had been running a lot of workshops for the Toronto Public Library. I was the writer that they would send out when they did these, often, maybe they send out other people too, but they'd send me out to do what they called satellite workshops. So I worked with youth involved in prostitution over the years, women at a shelter, youth in community housing who had a little art group, and there was 1 or 2 writers in the group, and they wanted a writer to come in. So there were all of these different experiences I had, and another amazing experience I had was being asked by Native Men's residents to come in and run 4 workshops in a series. One of the people who worked there had heard about the writing group I was leading for youth, and so I went in and I pretty much just did what I did with the youth, except thought about men and thought about like what I, what I thought would engage them and speak to their life experiences. So every week I would try to, bring in, for instance, Leonard Peltier's prison writings, and then also Reuben Carter's writing in prison, and kind of say like, okay, the theme this week might be about writing personal stories from life. And then another day I would bring in poetry, and I always tried to bring in like 1 or 2 Indigenous voices and 1 or 2 non-Indigenous voices writing on similar themes. And just I did a lot of research, both with the youth and with the men. I was constantly reading, trying to figure out what stories would engage people. And I guess, so Native Men's Residence has this long-term transition home, so people actually live there for a year, and it's largely all Indigenous staff, and there's a sweat in the back, and elders, and a men's group, and it's all men. So I guess they thought, well, this seems to work. The men were really enjoying the program. Let's do it again and again and again, and then they integrated into their core life skills training program. So I would work on these rotations of, I think, 6 weeks or something, or 8 weeks, and then 8 weeks off, and then 8 weeks on. So I'd go in and work for a morning a week with the men, and it was an amazing learning experience. Like I learned probably more doing that than I learned. I'm doing a PhD now, and I feel like that was a constant learning experience, and that's how I felt I was entering their home and saying, I can share my skills as a writer with you, but I don't know a lot of things, and you guys know a lot of things I don't. So it became a really interesting experience, and a very, I hope, rewarding one on both sides. I'm currently working on a new teen novel that is set in Parkdale and involves 2 girls, one of whom goes missing and the other searches for her. It's in some ways not autobiographical, but it takes a lot from my own childhood. My mother and her best friend owned a house together in Parkdale, and I grew up like my chosen sister was the daughter of her best friend, and we sort of grew up together and had all these misadventures and adventures, and sometimes I'm like, wow, I can't believe we did that, and nothing really terrible happened to us. So it was a different period, but it was, my teen years were sandwiched between Paul Bernardo and the Scarborough rapist. He was really at the height of, the police didn't know what was happening or who it was or whatever. It was when I was 12, and a girl went missing from a few blocks away. She was exactly my age. I remember staring at her face in the paper thinking that could have been me or Sheena, and my best friend. And then at 18, there was a 2.5-year-old who was taken from around the corner where I lived, and I thought, I think now looking back, I realize that in some ways my teen years, which are those years where you're experimenting, where you're taking all these risks, you feel like you're fearless. You feel like nothing's gonna happen to you. Or it's not that you don't think that, but you're learning for the first time, oh, if I do this, this is going to happen, possibly, or what danger is, what happens when you push boundaries and you do things. So I thought about my teen years, having a feminist mom and her best friend, and they would, dance around to We Are Family, and the message I had from my dad, too, was like, you can do anything, girls can do anything boys can do. But then there was this other message, like, don't go out alone at night because you're in danger at all times, and I could see that the world was a scary place and that women were not represented in all the places that I was told I could go, especially not women of color, and I thought, this is really confusing. Like, it's such a confusing thing to navigate, so my novel's trying to go look at that, but it's contemporary or almost futuristic. It's like so far, a goblin and a unicorn have both wandered into the story, so I seem to be, like not your ordinary wolf girl, often drawn to the fantastical. Thanks for listening to me, and maybe check out some of my books. They're in the library, or you can order them. They're in bookstores, and I look forward to hearing what other alumni are up to.